I am Suzanne LaGrande, and this is the Imaginary Possible, a show that looks at the captivating potentials and the troubling realities of artificial intelligence. Today, my guest is Joe Blaty, who is a practitioner of human-centered design and is interested in responsible and ethical uses of artificial intelligence. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, to begin, I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in artificial intelligence.
So I'm an architect by trade. I've been in a professional IT career for a little over 30 years, so I'm probably carbon dating myself, but I I enjoy working with emerging technologies and new technologies and experimenting with them because I want to be forward thinking. I take a people first approach to implementing new technologies. AI for me was being putting on my geek hat. It was a new technology that I had to play with, and I have been experimenting with it and researching it for a net while. Have written several articles on it, and I've been building some programming around it. So I've been working with it intimately, and I'm ready to actually advise my clients on how better they can leverage AI if that is the solution of choice.
So, you help people who might be interested in using AI technologies to incorporate them into their business or organization. Is that right?
That's right. And I also help um, my colleagues overcome their fear of AI because a lot of them are looking at AI and as potentially replacing them in their jobs. And I don't believe that that's the way we should be looking at AI. I think that what I try to do to allay their fears is think of AI as it being your co-pilot to make your life a lot easier. All you have to do is learn how to use it to make your life easier, and that kind of like takes the a little bit of the fear out of the equation.
Mhm. So, you are a proponent of human-centered design, which is a really
I am.
interesting term. Could you explain a little bit what that is and how that applies to artificial intelligence?
Sure. Human-centered design, which is also called design thinking, all centers around looking at the user, at the end user, and working backwards. So, in other words, not starting with a solution, starting with empathizing with the user, the ultimate beneficiary of whatever technology or innovation that you're trying to create, understanding their pain points, what aren't they getting from their current tools or whatever, and um, then prototyping. So coming up with some solutions, working with that end user, finding out what's working, what's not working, what has the potential for improvement, and then prototyping, testing with the end user, um, failing, going back to empathizing, prototyping, testing, failing. So it's an iterative process, and it is not necessarily linear either. So you can start anywhere on this type of methodology, and ultimately what we want to get to is innovation at the end. So the point there is that it's much less focused on the technology, it's much more focused on the end user.
And on solving a problem that they have.
Exactly. So relating that to AI, that's why I put it beside, is AI is not being developed with design thinking methodology or human-centered designs. On the contrary, it's a solution looking for a problem. So I think in a lot of cases, what you'll see is, or at least for the most part, AI or generative AI, which is the most popular AI implementation right now, generative AI models like ChatGPT, Claude, etc. They've been built in different ways. OpenAI uses more of a proprietary training model, whereas Anthropic is a little bit more constitutional AI focused. So, in other words, focused on being not harmful to humans, but ultimately they're trained in a vacuum. How they produce their output is not transparent. How they generate their language is not very transparent. So from a end user perspective, you don't know what you're getting. It's almost like it's dark magic that's coming out of the engines. And for that reason, it's fascinating, but it's also scary. So relating it back to human-centered design and design thinking, if we took a different approach and we actually focused on how people might benefit from the output or the outcomes from AI and designed the engines around the end result of making it easier for people to get what they need out of the AI, then that would be a total change in paradigm because we haven't been taking that perspective.
Has anyone done that? Has anyone tried a user first approach to developing AI
I
technology?
at least in the generative AI, and that includes a lot of the text to image creation products. I have not seen um, the generative AI's engines taking that. They're more of we know how to do a large language model. We know how to do natural language processing. So we're going to go off and do that in a dark room in the back room with data scientists that are brilliant. But the thing is that they're not looking at the impact to the humans that would most benefit from using it. I think the text to image, you see it even the gap even more so. For example, Midjourney, to prompt Midjourney to create an image that's in your head, you have to know all of the parameters. You have to know, the aspect ratio. You need to know, how to manipulate all of those parameters in the prompt. And that's not very user friendly. That essentially you don't think that way, and obviously your brain doesn't think that way. So I think that there's a lot of gap there that needs to be filled. The only human-centered type of AI development I think you see is the stuff that is focused around humans. So like facial recognition, because I mean, obviously you have to have humans involved with that. Otherwise, you're never going to have a database of human facial images. Still, the end user is not really the person that's their face is being recognized. It's more of who's going to use that. Law enforcement comes to mind because that's usually the places where it's used the most. Marketing, for example, like being able to recognize a face and say, uh, this person has just entered a plane. I know several airlines are doing that right now. Is recognize your face. Uh, this person on this frequent flyer account. They like brandy. So when they sit in a first class, offer them a brandy, that type of thing. So you get the hyper personalization with facial recognition. But again, they're not including those end users, the people that would benefit the most in the development of the AI.
So this brings up a lot of, I think, ethical questions about how AI technologies are being used. And I think people are rightfully concerned about some of the possible uses of AI. Could you talk a little bit about what some of those ethical concerns might be that people are discussing at the moment?
Absolutely. The most common problem is garbage in, garbage out. So if AI is trained on data, and the data that this who curates the data? Well, in some cases, that company that's creating the AI, like OpenAI, curates the data. That data set is probably a certain size and it contains a certain amount of information. But who determines that? Who is who's curating the information? Also, once the AI is trained, you have a set of responses. There, in some cases, there are humans that actually look at the responses during the training cycle and say, and rank the output. So how how harmful is this to a group of humans? Is this response better than that response? Whenever you have humans in a judgment factor and saying this is ranked better or this is ranked worse, there is the potential for human bias to be injected into the AI. So ultimately, AI can reflect all of the human biases of the humans that curated the data and that trained the outcomes from the AI.
Well, and I have heard of another really troubling aspect to this, which is that the people who are coding some of the data are, for example, there's a case in of people in Kenya who were paid $2 a day to look at horrific images to help train the data as to what was, what we don't want to see. But that was subjecting real humans to very traumatic images, which it
Agreed.
sounds like really scarred, the people who had to look at those images.
But
So
but the psychological impacts of the people that are actually working with the AI were not considered by the company that sponsored that human reinforcement learning by human feedback. So again, we're talking about like the human-centered design, but it's really the impact to humanity, not only from the outcomes, but also in this case, the training of the AI.
you are listening to The Imaginary Possible, a show about the captivating potentials and the troubling realities of artificial intelligence today. I'm your host, Suzanne LaGrande, and this is KBOO Community Radio, KBOO 90.7 FM in Portland. Well, let's talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Sure.
We have a history of various forms of oppression, which have created exclusionary practices as well as conscious and unconscious biases.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we want to use, say, a human-centered design approach, and we want to be able to correct some of these both biases, but also the practices that come from those biases that are exclusionary. How could we do that? And would AI help with that?
Good question. And actually, I just wrote an article recently on DE&I and AI, and it's interesting because when you think about the terms, you don't think that there's like a crossover, right? You don't think that at DEI you talk about focusing on humans and making humans work as their authentic self with their authentic self, bring that to work and feel comfortable as being whomever they are and giving them fairness in everything that they do. And so how does that relate to AI? Well, it's really interesting because really what we were talking about with bias, you can propagate that bias in your policies, you can propagate that bias in the AI. And so there is a crossover, especially when you talk about bias and that impacts DE and I as well. I think that it has the potential to harm if you're not if it's not deployed without care. And the point is that usually you have to have humans checking for bias, regardless of if it is human generated bias or if it's AI generated bias. So there has to be a human somewhere in the equation. It's kind of like when I talk about human resources and DE&I, you can't take the human out of human resources. You have to have a human somewhere in the equation auditing the outcome from whatever your process is. If it's a hiring process that's using AI, or if it's a hiring process that's not using AI, you have to audit it, and you have to understand that there could be potential biases that are being injected by your people. There could be biases in being injected by, the data that it's being trained on. Even in certain cases, like I just went through this in several cases, where an ATS engine, an applicant tracking system, is looking for keywords. Well, the keywords are placed in there by a human, right? And what they do is they say, okay, this is the type of candidate that we're looking for. That's already based on their experience, their background, and so they're already injecting a certain level of bias in that ATS.
So, is there any way that you see that efforts to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion could be aided by a artificial intelligence?
Absolutely. So the point there is that the auditing doesn't go away. It doesn't matter which direction you go, human focused or AI focused, but the AI, depending on the data, can be much less biased and more unbiased and fair in your hiring decisions, because it is AI does really good with processing massive amounts of data and looking at large data sets and finding patterns. And in a lot of cases, a candidate may have their resume, or they may have the credentials and documents, or may have like a LinkedIn profile. What I'm saying is that that candidate may not be a good fit for the position that they've applied to, but there may be other positions in the company that fits their skill set much better, and AI can identify those opportunities even if the candidate doesn't know about it, or the HR leader knows about.
So potentially, given AI's ability to comb through and analyze data, we could have a far more diverse workforce than we currently have if they just go by the data that's out there.
I wouldn't say like the data that's out there, because that's kind of generic. So
Well,
what I would
I guess what I'm saying is we have a diverse worlds with
Mhm,
lots of people who have multiple skills.
mhm.
So in some sense, we should have a match between that and the current positions that are open, right? We could potentially have a much more diverse workforce if we were just looking at the data and who has skills in certain areas, right?
I would say it's a little bit more complex, because you're correct, but I think it really is about capabilities. So that I'm a good listener and I can speak well at presentations, that probably those capabilities probably qualify me for a lot of roles that other people don't have. So I think really the key factor is we've got to kind of turn the whole hiring process, let's start again, and stop looking at a job title and stop looking at skills, kind of what you see in a job description, and start looking at people's capabilities, regardless of their physical attributes, or regardless of their sex, regardless of their
Or maybe
race.
regardless of keywords.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the AI can do that really well. But it's a huge overhaul of the way that we look at hiring and the way that we diversify our workforce.
Hmm. So, one last question for you.
Mhm.
It, if I'm understanding human-centered design, it really starts with the user and solving a problem, and it's not a top-down approach. It's kind of the opposite. It's a bottom-up approach.
It's a bottom-up approach, and part of the problem is finding the right problem to solve. So the in a lot of cases, we start out with something and say, how might we do something better? How might we solve this problem? And in working with a diverse group of people in the room, we find that that's actually not the problem we need to solve. There's a root cause to that problem, and so you have to take a step back. But that diverse group of people in a room, when you're facilitating that conversation, they surface those root causes a lot easier than if you're thinking monolithically and saying, I understand the problem. Here, let me solve it.
So here's my question. That makes sense to me, but then I look around at the way that organizations, governments, businesses are run, and they're all top-down decision makers.
That's right.
So
That's right.
so what do we do about that? What's the
It's
solution here?
it's actually it's kind of a different way of thinking of an organizational structure. It doesn't matter if it's you talk about government or you talk about business. It's really a flat management structure. It's a flat organizational structure where everyone's voice matters, and they all have input into solving problems. So in a lot of cases, we have to give up um, our pride maybe in saying that we know the right decisions and we know the right choice, and saying, well, collectively we understand the problem better, so let's find the problem to solve before we start making decisions.
Where is there the will to do this currently?
There, so so doing that kind of an organizational change is a huge cultural shift in an organization, and it's something that you have to do incrementally. It's not something that you can like flip a switch, almost like the agile methodology of the past. Like people said, okay, we're going to start doing things agile now. And the thing is you can't flip a switch. You have to actually start to change the cultural thinking. And sometimes the culture doesn't want to change. So I can say that with a lot of confidence that I've been in organizations that weren't ready for a cultural shift like that. Same thing goes here. Unless your organization is ready to make a cultural shift to a more targeted focus, inclusion of your people, neurodiversity, and like putting neurodiversity into your decision making. If your culture is not ready for that, then you have to approach it incrementally and test it to see if it will even pass the first set of tests. If it doesn't, then maybe you need a different strategy.
And of course, your culture is partly determined by the people who are the leaders of it.
Absolutely. And your willingness to abdicate those decisions to the people around you, your colleagues, that's kind of a change for you too. You have to start thinking that way, but really the benefit and the business value that you're going to get out of that, kind of like what we're talking about with Congress. If you actually went out and let your people make the decisions about what's important to them versus versus a congressman, like standing up, not having any political, you know, uh, like drivers behind him, just actually talking to the people, finding out what's important to them, and then incrementally making changes so that he satisfies his constituents, wow, what a different world it would be.
Absolutely. I've been speaking today to Joe Blaty, who is a consultant and a practitioner of human-centered design and a proponent of a people-first centered approach to incorporating artificial intelligence into organizations, businesses, and government agencies as well. If people want to find out more about you and your work, where can they go?
So you can reach me at joe.blaty@innovative-empathy.com. And I am also on LinkedIn. So please reach out to me. I'd love to hear more from you and love to talk to you about transforming your business, whether it's with AI or not.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
A pleasure speaking with you, Suzanne, and I look forward to the next time.
You're listening to The Imaginary Possible, a show about the captivating potentials and troubling realities of artificial intelligence today. I'm Suzanne LaGrande, and this is KBOO Community Radio, KBOO 90.7 FM in Portland. To listen to this and other episodes of The Imaginary Possible, visit us online at kboo.fm or theimaginarypossible.com. Thanks so much for listening.